Continuing to read from the novel Dallas Pimiento, Book 3, Bronchodilator. Starting with a piece called Unsold Copies Line the Crypt. Fun! One can find it in a spinning wheel of bees and fruit, or one can find it in the somber contemplation of the random patterns of grease stains left on a piece of paper by a biscuit. Only by accurately timing one's responses to fun, by statistically charting these fluctuating responses along the spectrum of fun, can one begin to penetrate the mysteries that will one day cause the dedicated observer to completely spoil his own fun and that of others when he decides to analyze and critique each experience as it happens. Girlfriends may abandon this kind of person, and acquaintances may strike his name from the list of invitees to parties without number. Some of us can't help it. The seductive pull of verbalizing and the habit of thought are too great. It is not that we like being killjoys. In fact, in quiet settings with only a couple of people, we can be quite entertaining. It is just that spontaneity is something that is best left to our solitary times. I know that personally, I'm always worrying that the other person isn't enjoying or feeling the same thing I am. I'm a take-charge guy with plenty of doubts about whether others want me to take charge. He walks alone, the emotional analyst. Awakening in the middle of the night, he wanders out into the backyard to feel the first chill of autumn in the air. A spaceship of unusual design, he later recalled it as resembling a fistful of golf tees annexed to a traditionally shaped barn, lands almost noiselessly not 10 feet from him. I've always wanted to see a UFO, he thinks, as the tears roll copiously down his face. All his life he has both feared and longed for the day when he would see the impossible. First it was Santa Claus, then Jesus, then Mick Jagger. Lately it has grown into his own picture on the cover of Time magazine, or some other similarly prominent publication, the appearance of which would confirm his arrival among the ranks of the celebrated and interviewed. "What planet is this?" asked the disappointingly mundane-looking alien that emerges from the ship. "How come you speak English?" our master of weights and measures asks. Enlightened produce. Two sneaker lamps, torn free from their positions beneath the bronze belly of Santa Claus's statue on Hospital Gown Lane, found themselves demagnetized in an unlit stairwell by the crudest of methods and thrown back into the back of a panel truck, headed, as best they could tell, south, towards the dried-up seabed. Not once during any of this ordeal had they managed to get a good look at their abductors. "I guess that makes us abductees," Roger, who had until now been the right-hand snicker lamp, as one faced the statue of Santa Claus with one's back to Porcelainity's show window, wondered to his mate laughingly. "Shut up back there," barked a phlegmy voice through the tight grill work over the tiny window that separated the cab from the cluttered cargo area. Megan, the other sneaker lamp, lay on the floor and whimpered softly, piteously. Her left bottom asparagus wheel had been raggedly broken off in the assault. It would never grow back, no matter what Roger might optimistically promise. As she lay huddled in a heap with the part of her anatomy that roughly corresponded to a head cradled by a dirty Happy Meal box crushed about it, Roger made no effort to comfort her. Did he secretly blame her for their predicament? His warnings about her being too friendly with passerby had made no impression on her over the 2 years of their existence. Did he think she should toughen up and prepare for the next phase of this trip? Unbeknownst to her, he too had suffered degradation at the hands of these criminals. His fish joints, both terminal and ablutive, had been smashed, probably beyond repair. Whatever Roger's true thoughts, it is certain that more than once on that long journey south he imagined with bitterness their former neighbor coming to rescue them. That was a laugh. Santa Claus was nothing more than a myth, just like Jesus and probably this Mick Jagger character. A cinematic version of the above events was in due course produced. Midway through production, a reporter from Cinnamon Toast magazine stopped by the elaborate set. Reading the same summary that you have just read, she asked, "What happens when they get to the dried-up seabed?" "I don't know," replied the novice director. "We're going to leave that to the audience's imagination." Glut of giants. Beings lodged in the old saxophone gave it an unusual sound. I am convinced that you need to have those beans removed, Pilot Whitney tried to make Todd Groner see sense. I like the way it sounds, Groner insisted calmly. He tooted about the room, offering up a musical tribute to each of the portraits of his ancestors that hung on the walls. I can't talk to the boy anymore. Whitney, already an old man when Groner had been born, complained to the scullery supervisor, Mrs. Sudsel. He's not a boy anymore, that's why. The old lady smiled crookedly and went back to her task, carrying a box of heaving chocolate up to Todd Groner's sister's room. Along the way, she passed the room where old man Groner, Todd's grandfather, had died. She was not pleased to see that the door was ajar. Putting her head inside for a quick peek before closing it, she was further upset to see workmen in white coveralls busy with alterations to the room. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Our job," replied a burly fellow who seemed to be in charge. After a hot exchange in which Mrs. Sudsel learned that Todd had ordered the work done, the old woman hurried off to complete her errand. "I don't feel too good," Lana, sister to Todd, admitted to Mrs. Sudsel as the latter peremptorily dropped the box of heaving chocolate on the table beside the bed to which the deformed young lady was loosely chained. "Well, I don't have time to cater to you right now. I have to talk to your brother." Mrs. Sudsel snapped and left as Lana gurgled and moaned in her nasal voice behind her. "You might have informed me at least about your intention to have your grandfather's death room transformed into a chamber of perversions." "Mrs. Sudsel," Todd Groner began, pausing to toot on his bean-corrupted horn, "heavy metal music isn't a perversion." He chuckled. "I tried to tell you," Whitney shook his head at Mrs. Sudsel. I've tried telling you." He turned his gaze to Groner. "You don't play heavy metal with a sax." Envisioning the piece structure. A lavender shirt lay draped over the hood of Bainfellow's vintage model canebreaker. For a moment, as he cautiously approached the thusly adorned vehicle, Bainfellow imagined that someone had been polishing it with an old rag. However, seeing the Dirk and Dumpo label sticking out of the collar, he knew that this was no old rag. More to the point, he realized as he picked up the shirt, no one would polish his car for him. He wasn't even a member of the country club where his car was parked. Car, he thought, feeling foolish. He corrected himself. The canebreaker was never a car. It was and remains one of the finest mechanical walking units ever made. "I must be going senile." "You must be talking to yourself," a voice said behind him. Bainfellow turned and saw a young shirtless man, bronzed from the sun and as leanly muscular as a racehorse, emerging from a thicket of magnolia blossoms. "My shirt, pal." He held out his hand. "My car, pal," Bainfellow answered, tossing the shirt to the stranger. "That is, my 1962 canebreaker mechanical walking unit." The stranger began to draw the shirt over his head. "Still a car, essentially," he said. Bainfellow said nothing to this. He couldn't afford to get into some kind of argument with a member of the club, which this young man obviously was. "I mean, just look at him," he explained to Irma later, handing her a photograph of the guy that he had obtained from the Prater's files. "I am," Irma replied, hungrily drinking in those handsome boyish features. She should have seen him with his shirt off, Bainfellow thought. No, she shouldn't have. "It's a nice one, though," the tousle-headed Adonis admitted. "Nostronox 839 under the hood, right?" Bainfellow, preparing to unlock the door and get in, replied, "I really don't know. I just drive it." That ought to show him, he thought. "Sam," called a feminine voice, "are my panties out there?" Bainfellow glanced at the magnolia in outrage. "I don't know," Sam called back. "Hold it a minute, pal," he said to Bainfellow. "Is it for sale?" Stricken past the template. Tense hours at the whalebone disinfection plant. Dulles Rodeo, a low-level transport worker, had brought a gun to work and begun firing at people from the foreman's observation tower. "Only foremen are allowed up there." Dather Rarick shook his fist and recited angrily. The whites of his eyes showed all around the hot chocolate of his irises. His prerogatives had been usurped. A shot from Rodia's gun shattered a thermos not 11 inches from his ear. "Get down, you moron," snapped Pison Pet, perhaps the only man at the plant that day with any sense. "He just might be our only hope," Wanda Small thought, as she watched Pet crawling on his hands and knees. "But he needs encouragement. She took off her bra beneath her sweater and drew it out through a sleeve. "Pison," she shouted, "look at this." When Pet turned towards her, she lifted her sweater up over her pendulous white breasts. Pet stared, mouth agog, only a second, then crawled away to reconnoiter further. "That's a fine trick," Merton the janitor told Wanda, "but how will you get the bra back on?" Wanda burst into sobs as she put her hands over her face. She turned and ran towards the stores of copier paper at the rear of the room. As she stepped into the long stretch of sunlight that streamed onto the floor from the row of cloister windows, she was shot down by Dulles Rhodia. "I warned them to stay out of the light," Pet shook his head sadly. He had reached the whalebone splinters repository, a rack of woven baskets into which the splinters resulting from processing were sorted by shape. He reached into the disused basket marked cameo-shaped and withdrew a pint of tequila. By the time the police helicopter finally arrived and sent 1,000 lethal rounds into the observation tower, the bottle was empty. "I guess that sorted him out," Pet commented with a giggle. "Pison, you need to get back to work," Dather growled as he stood before the tumbled structure that had once stood so high. Content with a vegetable. Feelings of vague unease and guilt never bothered the little girl hiding in the goat barn. Her marvelous rendition of one of the many historic Coca-Cola jingles, one from the 70s, I think, always gave her an inner strength whenever things started to go badly for her. Just at the moment, however, as the centipedes hunted over the farmyard for her, she knew she must remain silent. For inner strength, she must rely on a secondary method, visualizing Mick Jagger's triumphant knighting by the Queen. Unfortunately, all the little girl could visualize were the centipedes discovering her and knifing into her flesh with their sharp claws and equally sharp teeth. She was hardly a little girl by our standards. At 22 years old, she was already strong enough to pick up and carry the largest of the goats. However, among her own people, the rumor, who grow quite tall and whose lives were unusually long, she was considered still a little one. The goats, indignant at being carried around so much and for no good reason, plotted secretly to turn the girl over to the centipedes. When they reached the barn, whispered old Titchley, "Everybody shout, 'She's in here! She's in here!'" "Why, wait," demanded impetuous Stan Filker, muscling forward to the crowd. "Let's do it now." "No, no," hissed the others, dragging him back and surrounding him. As Filker struggled, old Titchley went to him and put his hands on his shoulders. "Listen to me, Stan," the old goat said calmly. "The girl is still too powerful. Remember when she threw you into the pond?" Filker looked away, red-faced. "Patience and caution have always served me well, Stan. Let them work for you." From outside the barn came the flash of lightning. All the goats began counting the seconds until the thunder followed. Before they could find out how far away the lightning was, the girl was among them, tossing them bodily out the open barn door. As she tossed, she glanced nervously out at the sky. Light bicycle with radishes. Chief among my current batch of problems is that the spaghetti fails to work as bait to capture the mechano-goat. "I told you that wouldn't work," our director of photography, Dieter Helms, reminded me just after lunch. "He claims he warned me it wouldn't work," I told the journalist who has come to watch the proceedings, but I don't recall him doing so. "Trouble on the Dallas Pimiento set" is what this journalist will report when she gets back. "You can't entice the mechano-goat with a plate of cold spaghetti." Holmes gestured disgustedly and puffed nervously on his European cigarette. "He knows my temper. The rest of the crew have yet to see a demonstration of it. So far I have been an exemplar of fun and civility." "You think hot spaghetti would work?" I asked pointedly. "Spaghetti is all we have." The local tribe, rebuffed in their attempts to find work on the picture, refused to provide us with anything that might tempt this strange beast which we hope to capture on film. "Have you tried batteries?" the journalist asked me. She is beautiful, in a funky, wire-headed journalist way. She chews on pencils. "No European cigarettes for her." At my diabolic look, she retreated a bit. "Battery acid?" she suggested. "Manfred," I cried out to my assistant, "have we tried batteries?" "The mechano-goat doesn't eat batteries," Manfred told the journalist. "What does he eat?" she asked. I glanced at Manfred, then Dieter. I raised my shoulders, looked back at the woman. "Have you actually seen the mechano-goat?" she asked. "I haven't," I replied. "Not with my own eyes, but I've seen illustrations." "What are we going to film, then?" Helms demanded. I pondered. "Heat up the spaghetti," I ordered. "We'll leave it out, but we'll move on to the scene where Brant Borden first talks to the native woman." The actress portraying the native woman is European, but our makeup artists have skillfully disguised this. He came upon the Prime Minister consulting a tapestry. Discipline, so long a fantasy for the prophet, was at last within his reach. He had begun a list of all that he wanted to achieve. By mid-morning on the eve of St. Turbidian's Day, he had reached number 14. Write a book of analogies. These analogies to provide revelation and instruction for those who read it. The prophet, named Styles Norvo at birth, put his humble ballpoint pen into his mouth and pondered. The book really should be illustrated to make the analogies come alive for the reader. Having only a crude conception of two-dimensional depiction, Norvo was not the man for the job, and he knew it. Perhaps Dr. Schlange could do it, the prophet said aloud, startling his tortoise. He congratulated himself on the idea as he calmed his pet. Later that day, after he had completed his day's quota of prophecies, Norvo put on his best sandals and set foot on the path that would take him down the mountain to the little village where Dr. Schlange lived. Along the way, he met a man tending a flock of goats. "Hail, Styles Norvo, prophet," the man called. He beckoned him closer. "It's a good thing I ran into you," the goatherd said. "I need to ask you something. Do you think Lindsay Lohan's career is over?" Norvo rubbed his chin. "Well, I don't have any of my consulting tools with me, except for this talking rock, but we will see what it says." He thereupon threw the rock he held his hand down on the... What? He thereupon threw the rock he held in his hand down on the ground and examined it. "Not yet," he answered definitively, "but I don't know exactly why. Visit me when I return to my cabin, and I'll give you details." "Thank you, Norvo," the man bowed low. "Take this goat as payment." He grabbed one of the goats by the ear and thrust it into Norvo's hand. Arriving at the village by nightfall, Norvo led the goat to the home of Dr. Schlange. Entering, he found the doctor/illustrator tending to none other than Lindsay Lohan. "She's drunk," said Schlange, "but I think I can mend it." "Nice sheep," the actress slurred and laughed. "A sheep is like a goat," Norvo replied, "but how to illustrate it?" The essence of the screw. "You're nothing but a fake," Dancy's note read. It lay unopened on Sneaky's desk. Dancy gestured viciously at Sneaky, stabbing her index finger at the note. Sneaky, however, refused to look at her. Of course, he knew she had thrown something onto his desk, but fearing it was a dead mouse, would not look down. His plan was to wait until the class was over and then walk away. Besides, he didn't want to miss any of Dr. Schlange's fascinating lecture. "Remember," the white-bearded doctor of dubious medical learning pointed with the length of bamboo at the screen. "Don't allow the customer to get away with just the purchase of an appliance. We make money on the appliances, of course, but that's peanuts compared with what we make on adapters, ornaments, and refinement additives for the appliances. Gum paste and navel jellies are the foundation of this company's wealth." "I don't see why he has to use peanuts as a term indicating low value," complained Rachel to Dancy. "Peanuts are a valuable food crop where I come from." Dancy ignored her, continuing to flail her hands at Sneaky and now addressing a series of grunts to her signaling. Sneaky heard the grunts, but did nothing except slowly put his hand on his shoulder in an indecipherable imitation of a mouse. He moved his hand about as if the mouse were dancing mockingly at Dancy, who understood none of it. "What is he doing?" Rachel asked Dancy. "I don't know," answered Dancy. She began pounding on her desk. "Is that supposed to be a peanut?" Rachel suddenly gasped in horror. Dr. Schlange, Ned Feast, also taking the class, although he was actually attending a different convention at the same hotel, rose to his feet. "Could you go over the new product line again, this time with an emphasis on how the prospective consumer is predicted to view it, from a domestic consumption standpoint, that is?" "Certainly," Schlange managed to say as he began to cough. A mass of beard hair had become lodged in his throat. As he collapsed to his knees, clawing at his face, the fake mouse continued to dance. The significance of these truths has been wildly exaggerated. "She's gone," Verlin insisted. He tried to get back to his writing, but Marla still stood in the doorway behind him, calling, "Julia! Julia!" over and over at intervals precisely spaced to infuriate him the most. Bob passed his hands before Verlin's face and picked up a stack of business cards from the desk. "You print these yourself?" he asked, biting hard on his pipe and tilting the cards to the light. "Yes," Verlin sighed. He had to finish this story or overwhelming guilt would set in, making him useless for the rest of the day. "It'll never do, old boy. Hand one of these to a potential patron and you'll get nothing but a sad shake of the head." Bob returned the homemade cards to the desk with a sad shake of his own impassive patrician head, gray at the temples and drawn ever upwards by the pipe. Verlin ignored him, concentrating on finishing the story despite the increasing number of freaks and zombies filling the room, though he did make an effort at working a quick parody of the man onto the page. Marla, who now asked aloud, "Can she not hear me?" would be spared this treatment. Verlin had no place yet for a woman in his story. "What are you writing?" Julia, who had crawled back into the room through the secret door that only she and Verlin knew about, now huddled under the table, but craned her head up to look at the nearly completed story. "A story!" Verlin snapped. "Keep your head down, or I'll tell Marla you're here." He finished a savage rejoinder by the Colonel without conscious thought. "Why would I care if Marla knew I'm here?" Julia asked stupidly. Verlin literally growled as he pushed Julia back down and pressed on, heedless of whether his ending would make sense. The Colonel, smugly basking in the satisfaction of having told the Bob character exactly what to do with his expensive paper goods, now turned his attention to the Julia character, slowly smothering her beneath his immense foot. Only the Marla character could save her now with a brutal knife thrust to the Colonel's unprotected back.